Pokemon Scarlet and Violet just released, and we were gifted about 100 new returning Pokemon in the DLC. Today, I'll be breaking down the top 10 new Pokemon for these games in competitive, so that then you guys know what you should be using in time for Regulation E. This list will not include anything that's most likely going to be banned, due to the fact that Pokemon like Shaman and Darkrai probably are not going to be allowed due to their mythical status, so why talk about them today? If you guys enjoy this type of content and want to see more of it on the channel, of course, make sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe for more amazing content like this, as it does help with the channel a lot. Also, make sure to check out Kurt, who's going to be put in the annotation here. He did an amazing job editing today's video and also making sure it got out to you guys so you knew what to be running before Regulation E starts. With all that said though, let's break down the list today, starting with our number 10 entry. Now, starting off with number 10, we have one of our 2 joint entries today, but I promise you it's going to be worth it. I already know the second I say what they are, you're going to want to click off the video, so just make sure to hear me out, because our number 10 entries today are going to be Volbeat and Illumise. When you think about Volbeat and Illumise, you typically think of just discarded bug types that you would not even consider using on a playthrough team, let alone in competitive, but I can assure you they fill a very strong niche in the current format. With the lack of Whimsicott until the Indigo Disc DLC, having a prankster Pokemon with utility moves like Thunder Wave, Encore, and Baton Pass, as well as the ability to still set weather like Tornadus could, actually is a pretty good niche, and these Pokemon happen to fill it. While I don't exactly think these will be as potent as Whimsicott, I'm assuring you guys that with Tailwind being so relevant right now, having a budget Whimsicott at least will fill the need, and we've seen this at least work pretty well with the lack of Prankster Tailwind Pokemon earlier in the format thanks to the rise of Murkrow in Regulations A through C. And despite having Tornadus back as an objectively better setter than them, I still think they will certainly find a way to shine in the current format. I'm sure the best way to use these Pokemon is probably going to be next to a Pokemon with the ability competitive, due to the fact that with the move Charm, you actually can hold a nice niche against Tornadus, since unlike Tornadus, you can actually lower your partner's Pokemon's stats without harming their speed necessarily, which is going to be great for Tailwind teams. We've seen a couple new additions with this ability in the rise of Milotic and the newly buffed Empoleon, so this would definitely allow you a strong partner for these two in order to fire off some really fast, strong +2 special attacks and take advantage of the Tailwind that you could currently set. If you give these Fireflies a Terra Dark typing and the Covert Cloak, you can at least probably get some actual genuine use from them as little support demons that are just going to fly around the screen and cause havoc, and quickly snowball games in terms of your favor. Going into our number 9 spot, we have none other than Conkeldurr, which is a strong fighting type addition for Trick Room cores. While we already do have a pretty strong Guts user in the form of Ursuline, I certainly wouldn't sleep on Conkeldurr due to the fact that on the right team, this can definitely allow you to have an additional strong breaker for most of your opponents. For starters, Conkeldurr is going to give Trick Room teams a Pokemon that's actually slower than Ursuline and only really outpaced by Amoonguss and Torkoal under Trick Room as far as viable Pokemon go. However, at the very least, with your Guts ability as well as the Flame Orb item and Protect, you can at least definitely pressure Amoonguss pretty well, since you'll be going from a Pokemon that's susceptible to Spore to a Pokemon that's going to outright bash Amoonguss with your Facade plus Guts. One area where Conkeldurr will truly shine is probably going to be in the fact that it can actually damage Ursuline pretty well and force it to Terra. Not only this, but with your strong priority in Mach Punch, you're able to also handle fast Pokemon like Chien-Pao, and while it's not as useful as a utility move like Fake Out would be from Iron Hands, it definitely will still see some play for sure, since it's not just limited to turn 1. I think this will, if nothing else, at least be somewhat considerable on Trick Room teams, but with Iron Hands being so relevant, I certainly don't think it will exactly take the role of the Trick Room fighting type for most people. I'd probably use this with either Terra Normal in order to deal more damage with your Facade, giving you a nice stab for it, or use it with the Terra Dark in order to deal more damage to a lot of different Pokemon that would be useful in Trick Room, such as Dusclops, Pre-Terra Cresselia, and also the newly rising Terra Ghost Ursaluna, which has been fairly relevant ever since Worlds 23. Conkeldurr definitely won't redefine Trick Room or anything, but I'd be shocked to see it not making a strong presence in the metagame, at least enough of one to watch out for in Regulation E. Our number 8 spot today goes to one of my favorite Weather Sweepers personally in the form of Ludukolo. Ludukolo gives a pretty unique Swift Swim option to rain teams, giving you not only access to a fast Fake Out user, but also a strong water type that actually beats other water types. Ludukolo has had some phenomenal viability in previous generations, and with its best partner Politoed returning to the format, it's no wonder to see why Ludukolo could be a strong option for Regulation E. With Dynamax being a thing of the past, Ludukolo can finally Fake Out teams reliably without having to worry about a single Pokemon in every single game being immune to Fake Out. However, with Terra Ghost being a thing now, it definitely won't exactly be as free as it was in generations such as 7 and 6. Probably one of the biggest things Ludukolo has going for it in this current generation though has to be how dominant Urshifu Rapid Strike is. Ludukolo gives teams a strong way to actually pressure Urshifu, whether that's through coverage like Ice Beam for the Rising Terra Grass sets, or just a strong Giga Drain that can handle the common Terra Water movesets. Having a 4 times resistance to Surging Strikes, as well as some okay physical bulk, means that Ludukolo will probably be one of the best checks you'll currently have to this Pokemon, and especially being a really potent offensive option as well, means that most teams partnered with Tornadus could actually probably benefit from Ludukolo on them. I think one of the best things Ludukolo has going for it though, at least in my opinion, is probably going to be the Assault Vest, which actually allows you to check Pokemon like Fluttermane as well on the special side, meaning this is a really good offensive Pokemon that doesn't just die to 2 of the top threats. I do think that people might sleep a little bit on how good Perish could still be with this team, since Ludukolo was a definitely strong partner with Goth, and with Politoed still being fairly meta relevant in my opinion, I do think these 3 could also form a really strong bulky core, at least if you're not trying to run a really hard offensive rain team. So Ludukolo might have some decent competition going for it this gen, especially with how good Sun is right now. I do still think despite all of this though, Ludukolo will be an option to watch out for in Regulation E, leaving it at our number 8 option today. Speaking of Rain, our number 7 option is probably going to be a fairly needed support Pokemon for Rain, being Politoed. While Tornadus probably will still be the best option to set Rain in Regulation E, the roll compression that Politoed does give for teams is definitely nothing to sneeze at. One of the best benefits of using Politoed is that it's a strong rain setter that doesn't actually require any sweepers to be useful. You can instead use it similar to T-Tar, where it just happens to be a good Pokemon, they can also clear your opponent's weather for you. When you factor in its pure water typing and support moves like Perish Song and Haze, you can start to see why Politoed will actually probably have a pretty strong niche in the current metagame. While fat teams have definitely taken a dive in Regulation D, I fully believe Politoed will still provide bulkier playstyles with a strong support Pokemon, especially on Perish Trap teams. Typically, Politoed in previous generations has been one of the strongest partners you can actually use with Goth Intel besides maybe Mega Gengar, and I would be very surprised to see if this actually changed in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Politoed can probably use a health gaining berry such as Citrus or Aguav, and a moveset with Protect, Perish Song, Haze, and Encore in order to be a really strong disruptor. If you're not feeling Haze, don't fret, because Politoed also can take advantage of moves like Hypnosis in order to put enemies to sleep, or the newly gained access to Chilly Water in order to make sure that you could drop your opponent's attack stat, which gives Politoed a really good way to just outlast opponents in this currently strong metagame in order to make sure that Perish Trap can take them out. I'm unsure if Politoed will necessarily make Pelipper any less relevant than it currently is due to the fact that Torn just is the better rain setter that can also sit Tailwind, but at the very least, I do think this will be a noteworthy option to consider on rain teams, at bare minimum over the Prankster setting that Torn does provide. Going into our number 6 Pokemon, coming back, we have one of our last joined entries being both Weezing forms. Now, I want to be honest, while you might have convinced me that the fairy type Weezing Galar would have been the better Pokemon, I don't actually think that it's that cut and dry this generation, and I think that both are pretty even with each other. I do still think that both forms will be pretty useful, but that's not really due to their typing, stats, or even their move pools. It's actually due to their ability neutralizing gas. Weezing can truly control so much of a game thanks to this ability. If you need to click Protect against Urshifu to stall a turn of Tailwind, Weezing can allow you to do that. What about switching against a Shadow Tag Pokemon so you don't lose your endgame win con? Weezing can help with that too. While you're unable to nullify a lot of signature abilities like Zero to Hero, Photosynthesis, and a handful of others, you can certainly still nullify so many game-changing abilities that Weezing actually has a really distinct niche in VGC just off of this alone. I'm fairly certain that types like Grass and Flying will probably be your best options for Terra due to the fact that you can get rid of your ground type weakness, and while I'm fairly sure that we'll see a lot of teams rising as Weezing teams just to use the gimmick with a slacking, I do think this will still have a fairly strong presence even outside of gimmicks due to the fact that so many ability Pokemon are currently at the very top of the format, and just getting to stop a lot of Pokemon that need these in order to win games will be huge for you. Now, the bump from our 6th entry to our 5th one is actually a truly breathtaking amount, and I do think that our number 5 entry is honestly so much better than Weezing that I could have made this a top 5 video altogether, but I still had a lot of Pokemon I needed to go over, so I didn't really want to leave out anything. Our 5th entry today is going to be none other than our returning pseudo-legendary Como, and it's probably going to be the second most prominent Terra user returning to Scarlet and Violet. Como is going to have a wide array of really strong Terra types in its arsenal, such as Fighting, Steel, Poison, Normal, and Fire, all for offensive sets. Meanwhile, Water and Fairy still make some very good options if you're going with a more defensive moveset. While I'm sure at first glance most people are probably just going to solely think of Como as a Throat Spray, Clanger, or Soul user, I do think that Como has a lot of presence as well with its more defensive options, with options like Body Press and Iron Defense. Como can provide teams with a really strong check to both their Shifu forms, Chiyu, Rillaboom, and many other top tier Pokemon thanks to its typing and bulk, making it a fairly noteworthy threat for most players even if you don't Terra. However, there's a single Pokemon at the top of the usage that's not exactly going anywhere that pretty much will make most people have to Tera this even if it does have merit outside of that, being Fluttermane. While there's certainly a good amount of Fluttermane counterplay in the current format, every time we think it's finally not going to centralize the format, we continue to see the next regional where it has a minimum of 6 out of 8 top cuts, as well as over 60% in day 2 for usage. I think we can all finally admit that Fluttermane is definitely not going anywhere, and unless if you see VGC ban Fluttermane, this will continue to be a top 5 Pokemon regardless of what's introduced. And this spells a lot of trouble for Como. While Tera can certainly mitigate this, it's a huge reason why Dragonite also doesn't see a lot of consistent usage at regionals, meaning that you have to Tera your Pokemon every single time you bring it, which can telegraph a lot of your game plan. When you're so heavily relying on Tera in an open sheet format, you don't have a lot of the same surprise factor you'd have on ladder, and it can certainly telegraph a lot of your game plan, especially in a best of 3 scenario where you've already seen the damage that the Pokemon can do to your team. While Como is a pretty threatening Tera type user, when you compare it to the other Pokemon in our top 5 that can still win games fairly confidently without going for Tera, I don't exactly think this can rank any higher than a number 5 entry today, despite being a really threatening sweeper altogether. Going into number 4 today, we have our only starter Pokemon to make the top 10 today, which received a huge buff in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, being Empoleon. Now I do want to add a little bit of an asterisk here. I do think Empoleon might be banned in terms of Regulation E due to the fact that it is currently home exclusive outside of the gift event for the Sinnoh Egg in Scarlet and Violet. Which if that ends up being the case, then this entry will just go to Milotic, which currently is sitting in our honorable mentions, but I'll get into that in a bit. However, with the fact that we have home Pokemon currently legal, such as Landorus, Therian, and Cresselia, I don't exactly see any reason why Empoleon of all things would currently be banned. Speaking of Landorus T, Empoleon received a huge buff in this generation, replacing its currently useless ability of Defiant out for competitive, which not only takes so much better advantage of Intimidate users, but it also takes a lot better advantage of Empoleon's offenses. Considering your special attack is 25 base higher than your physical attack, and your special move pool also just is objectively better anyway, it's no wonder to see why this buff will be pretty huge for Empoleon going forward. While Empoleon certainly isn't exactly known for being a super relevant Pokemon in VGC, we have actually seen Empoleon win a single world championship all the way back in 2009 in Pokemon Platinum. With the addition of Tera, you can get rid of your weakness to types like ground and fighting, while also still maybe using the coverage that this would provide in order to try and change how you're going to play Empoleon. For example, if you're really worried about grass types and you're also worried about opposing ground types, you can go with the Tera flying typing in order to hit both. Or you can go with the Tera fire typing, which gets you several really strong resistances in the current format, and it plays pretty nicely with your pre-Tera typing of water and steel. Empoleon will probably be best suited for Tailwind teams though, with partnership for the Fireflies especially being fairly good on this Pokemon, since you can take advantage of their move Charm in order to proc your competitive without hurting any of Empoleon's other stats that would be a lot more useful for it. While I don't think Empoleon will necessarily break the game or anything, I do think it's a lot more versatile and a lot less Tera reliant than Como at the very least, so I do think it's going to be a strong number 4 option, but compared to our top 3, it holds no candle to any of these. Going to our number 3 option, this covers our first newly created Pokemon, and it's none other than Ursuline's Blood Moon form. Now, of everything on our list today, I do think this is the most likely to be banned. While it's far from broken though, I do think it's going to fall under a similar classification to Ash Greninja, which proved to be an event-only Pokemon that could not transfer outside of its current game, which ended up also being banned in Sun and Moon and Ultra Sun and Moon anyway. Hence why I do think it might get banned. However, unlike Ash Greninja, this wasn't an event-only Pokemon. You could actually just catch this in the DLC, so I do think it at least has enough of a reason to be allowed in the Regulation E metagame. Now, Ursuline's Blood Moon form definitely has a lot going for it. This ends up being a special attacker, meaning it doesn't have to worry about Intimidate, and with its signature ability being Mind's Eye, being a mix of Scrappy and Keen Eye, you can definitely get some strong damage with your signature move Blood Moon, which is a really high base power normal type attack of 140. With other moves like Earth Power in order to hit most resistances for normal besides like Corviknight for example, or Terra Steel Levitate Pokemon, as well as moves like Hyper Voice for a strong normal spread, and even Terra Blast to not only take advantage of another stab post-Terra, but also to take advantage of your normal type pre-Terra, Ursuline definitely shaping up to be a very threatening Pokemon for both its forms this generation in VGC. I do think Ursuline's new form though will still definitely be worse than the Hisui form, mostly due to the fact that its base 52 speed is actually going to be slower in Trick Room, which is the best way to use this Pokemon. Now the Blood Moon form not being as item reliant on a Flame Orb for example does mean you could throw a Room Service on this in order to be slower. At the same time though, I don't really think this wants to be forced to hold a room service either, since that does hurt a lot of its potential for high damage output. Despite this though, being a special attacker for Trick Room does definitely offer a lot of strong benefits, and with a lot of really strong special options not really being super viable outside of Torkoal, I do think this at least will have a chance to shine. I still think Ursulina's new form will prove to be a menace in VGC, but I don't exactly think it's going to be the better Ursulina form, and it might suffer in usage because of that, landing it at our number 3 option today. Now our final returning Pokemon in today's list, and our number 2 entry today, is going to be the shining star of VGC, being none other than Clefairy. Even with the addition of Maushold this gen having a really strong fully evolved Friend Guard Pokemon, Clefairy will still be a really strong addition to the Regulation E format due to its much wider support move pool. With access to moves like Icy Wind, Helping Hand, Heal Pulse, Encore, Thunder Wave, Charm, Fake Out, Gravity, and even Imprison, Clefairy gives you so many options for support that it might even have too many options. While Clefairy has far from usable stats, at the very least thanks to the Violet and the Pure Fairy typing, you certainly have a pretty strong niche in the current format despite how offensive most Pokemon are right now. Clefairy is probably going to benefit most from either using Terra Ghost or Terra Dark in order to avoid Prankster Dark Pokemon or opposing Fake Out users, which should ensure that your support fires off as often as possible. I fully imagine Clefairy's best role will be next to strong setup win cons like Roaring Moon, Como, and Iron Hands in order to draw in most opposing options that would otherwise KO these Pokemon but fail to KO Clefairy. Clefairy's best job in any given match is honestly just to stay alive. As long as it exists, just like with Amoonguss, you can definitely apply a lot of pressure in the field, ensuring that your opponents kind of just have to respect you. I'd be surprised if Clefairy didn't shoot up in usage significantly compared to other Regulation E Pokemon, and while it certainly won't break the game, I think this will definitely be a strong contender for the best returning Pokemon and one of the best new Pokemon in Scarlet and Violet for your next VGC Regulation E tournament. Before we break down our clear-cut number 1 option, I did want to give a fairly good shout out to a lot of the niche Pokemon that just ended up not making the list today. Starting off, I have 3 Pokemon that I think were really strong contenders, but just get outclassed by Pokemon currently viable in Scarlet and Violet. I've already mentioned Milotic, which honestly just gets pretty outclassed by Empoleon, but we do also have Shiftry and Snorlax for options in this honorable mention. While Shiftry did gain a huge buff with Wind Rider, at the same time, its strong offensive typing of Dark and Grass just ends up failing in comparison compared to Brambleghast, which is a much better matchup to current metagame threats. And especially when Brambleghast now gain access to Poltergeist and Grassy Glide, this fixes a lot of current issues this Pokemon had in terms of the current format, making it just a better grass type for Wind Rider. Meanwhile, we have Snorlax as well, and while Snorlax is certainly a really threatening Belly Drum user as a pure normal type for Trick Room, and it underpaces Ursulina by a considerable amount, at the same time, Ursulina just has a much better stat spread, and also a secondary stab of Earthquake is nothing to sneeze at. We do have a few fairly original options that just ended up not currently holding up to the metagame either, with these being Vikavolt, Infernape, and both Ninetales forms. Starting with both Ninetales forms, while these do certainly share some overlap as weather setters with Abomasnow and Torkoal, at the same time though, I think their real competition comes from Tornadus, which is just a faster weather setter as well as having the ability Prankster to boast. Meanwhile, any sort of slower team would probably just prefer Torkoal and Abomasnow anyway, due to the fact these do give those archetypes a really strong option for Trick Room, due to the fact that both Pokemon have strong niches for these Trick Room teams. Well, Vikavolt's certainly a good Trick Room sweeper, and it does have a lot going for it with its 145 special attack. However, at the same time, I do think its stabs of Electric and Bug just don't offer a lot in the current metagame, though having Levitate as an immunity to Ursulina could mean that a Terra typing like Steel or Ghost could at least give you a strong defensive niche in that matchup. Finally, Infernape does have a pretty good presence as a really fast fighting type with Fake Out and Feint. However, at the same time though, I still think that Iron Hands will probably be the better Fake Out user anyway in this current format, and despite all the utility Infernape does provide to teams, I just think it got power crept. With that said though, let's break down our number 1 entry today. Now our number 1 entry today is going to be everyone's favorite new Pokemon using competitive and the clear best Pokemon in the Teal Mask DLC, being Ogerpon. Now Ogerpon is probably going to be one of the strongest terrestrial Pokemon in the entire Pokedex, due to the fact that its ability and body aspect allows you to raise one of attack, defense, special defense, or speed by 2 stages based on the mask you're holding. While every stat besides speed does require the use of a held item, and while regardless of form you are required to keep your Terra typing of either grass in your base form or fire, rock, and water in your secondary forms, I still think this will be a fairly threatening Pokemon in terms of VGC, despite how telegraphed this is. If you're wondering about which forms I think are the best, I think that Fire and Water are the clear cuts here, with Rock still being a really strong offensive type for this thing, and then the pure Grass form will probably be the weakest, despite having item access. Starting off with the Grass form, this does give you a +2 boost to speed, which you would definitely take advantage of with Horn Leech as well as your Terra Grass typing, and an item such as a Life Orb or a Choice Band to boast. And I do think that its pre-Terra typing of Defiant still holds a pretty strong meta relevance here. I just think that overall this Pokemon does end up faring a lot worse due to the lack of a really strong secondary stab. Though with coverage options like Stomping Tantrum and Playoff, you can certainly still make this one work. Moving on to our other 3 forms, however, these all come with really strong secondary typings for you offensively. Starting off with the Rock form, this does give you a +2 boost in your physical defense, allowing you to combat most of the physically heavy metagame. And while you do have a pretty bad typing in pure rock, as well as your signature move Ivy Cudgel being a strong rock type stab in this form that has 100% accuracy, 100 base damage, and no other form of drawback. With coverage like Stomping Tantrum for steel types and Horn Leech for everything in between, you could probably just throw on Spiky Shield as a really good 4th move and run Wild as an offensive threat in the current metagame. The Fire form will basically do the same thing with a Fire type Ivy Cudgel, though in this case you might want to consider Playoff over Stomping Tantrum due to the fact that Fire and Grass really only struggle against dragons. While you do get a +2 attack in this form, I do think your pre-Terra ability in Mold Breaker actually gives you a strong niche in the metagame, since Heatran can't even Terra on successfully without going for a Terra type of dragon, since otherwise one of your stabs should always pressure it. Meanwhile, the Water type form is probably going to be one of the best defensively in this case, due to the fact that a strong support set with Horn Leech, Water type Ivy Cudgel, Follow Me, and Spiky Shield will be fairly good. And thanks to the fact that you have the ability Water Absorb, you can actually check Urshifu pretty confidently in your base form. While Post-Terra definitely has its benefits with things such as the water typing being a pure type now, the +2 special defense, and a lot of other benefits, I do think that typically this will probably be the form that stays pre-Terra the most, due to the fact that Urshifu Rapid is so relevant that having a really good Follow Me user that's completely immune to Surging Strikes is just too good to pass up. I do fully expect all 4, if they are legal, to have strong results in Regulation E, which is why they're going to be all ranking as a joint entry at the #1 spot in today's list. Hopefully you guys enjoyed today's top 10 video, and if you want to see some more content like this for VGC, make sure to subscribe and like the video for more, and comment some of your ideas that you want to see next down below. We're back with videos every week, so make sure you guys hit the notification bell in order to never miss one of these uploads. Also, if you made it this far into the video and enjoyed what you've seen, consider checking out Kurt's channel, which again is going to be in the description down below, and if I can put it a second time in the annotation, I'll do that as well, since Kurt also uploads phenomenal competitive Pokemon content, and he did an amazing job editing this video, especially in such a short time. With that said, we'll see you guys in our next video on the channel, which should hopefully be next week on Saturday. Until then, peace out guys.